family. Over the last few weeks, I have talked to you about the nature of different relationships in light of what we're seeing in the Bible. This morning we saw what a tainted relationship can look like between brothers. And in chapter 38 of Genesis, which is where we'll be spending our time this morning, we're going to see a different kind of relationship gone wrong. And we're going to see what happens when good people fail to do the right thing. And how other people are forced into making decisions that they shouldn't have normally had to make. Today we're going to be talking about the line of Judah in chapter 38, or Judah's story, if you will. In verse 1 it says, "It happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adulamite." Understand this is right after the selling of Joseph and the telling of his father that Joseph is dead, whose name was Hirah. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he took her and went into her, and she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. Yet again she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Chezib when she bore him. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother." But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground, so as to not give offspring to his brother. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah my son grows up," for he feared that he would die like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. Now, first of all, Judah's going to the Canaanites for a wife, which we know from past chapters is not what God wanted people to do. In fact, it's the polar opposite. But Judah goes and does this thing and takes for himself a Canaanite woman who bears him 3 sons. Right? Now we're going to see that Judah's sons, really all of them, fall entirely short of the mark, and Judah himself does in this chapter. But one of them is so wicked, so evil, that God smites him and doesn't even bother to tell us what his crimes were. There is not very many people in the Bible that can be said of. Usually we know why God smites people. Usually the Bible tells us what led to that decision. We're not even told that about her. He's just gone. The polar opposite of Enoch, if you will. We have no idea what he did wrong, just like we have no idea what Enoch did right. We just know that God decided they didn't need to be here anymore. But by now, already had a wife, this Tamar, and as is the custom of the people during this time, and later on it will actually become part of the Mosaic law, or the Levitical law, if you will. I guess that would be more accurate to say Levitical law, wouldn't it? It becomes part of the Levitical law that if a man is to die and his wife is without offspring, that the man's brothers are to provide her with offspring to raise up. This serves 2 purposes. Alright? It leaves somebody to continue that brother's name. Right? But this is actually the spoken reason, and is still the secondary reason. The primary reason for this rule of thumb, this cultural norm, was because without sons, a widow was without aid. A widow relied upon her sons to take care of her in the absence of a husband. And so if a woman's husband died and she had no children, she basically just had to hope and pray on the good graces of other people. And if you've ever been anywhere outside the doors of this building, you know that that's not exactly reliable. And so there was a cultural norm, a status quo to be kept, that the brother-in-law would provide this woman with offspring. So that the offspring would grow up and take care of her, and so that the brother's name would not be lost. This brother of Onan, right? So he decides, I'm not doing this. I'm not raising another man's sons. He didn't even care that it was his brother's son that he would have to be raising. He says, I'm not doing this. But he was more than happy to take the woman as his wife. He was more than happy to take her and sleep with her. He just wasn't going to give her children. Now, I really do believe that Onan's biggest crime is not the physical act of spilling his seed on the ground, if you will, as the Bible puts it. A lot of people will tell you, well, that's the sin. But the fact is, while that's in the Levitical law that that's a sin, I think that people see that they're missing the whole point of this. Onan's flaw, his fault, his crime, was in not providing for his family. It was not upholding his responsibility. He took his brother's widowed wife and was more than happy to have sex with her for his own gratification, but refused to fulfill his duty. That was his crime. He had a responsibility that he actually agreed to and then neglected to fulfill. Understand this. God takes promises and oaths very, very seriously. In fact, at a later date I will do a study on this, but I'll show you that there are parts of the Bible where men are simply struck down for not keeping a promise. God doesn't care how small your promises are. He doesn't care how big they are. His people are to be people of their word, as he is a God of his. And so when Onan took her as a wife, he agreed to the responsibility of providing her with offspring. Now Judah, I truly believe at this point is trying to make the right decisions, right? Judah is telling her, well, since my sons are being, turd buckets over this, right? And they're not going to do what they're supposed to do. They're being disobedient. So you're just going to come live with me and I'm going to take care of you, right? So if his sons aren't going to fulfill their responsibility to this woman, he's going to step up and do the right thing. I actually think at this time we can applaud Judah on his character. Now, the idea is that Judah is going to keep Tamar in his household until his youngest son, let me make sure I say his name right. Yeah, it's Shelah. I don't know why that has become a woman's name if it was originally a man's, but Shelah grows up. So he's too young to take her as a wife. He's gonna take care of Tamar until this boy can grow into a man and fulfill that responsibility to her. Now, in verse 12, the scriptures read, in the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah was comforted herself with a veil, wrapping herself up, and sat at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, and she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, and he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face, he turned to her at the roadside and said, "Come, let me come into you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, "What will you give me that you may come into me?" He answered, "I will send you a young goat from the flock." And she said, "If you give me a pledge until you send it." He said, "What pledge shall I give you?" She replied, "Your signet, your cord, and your staff that is in your hand." So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. Then he arose and went away, and taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood. So, this is where we start getting into Judah's sin. But first we have to address Tamar's, right? So, at this point, the scriptures say in verse sorry, the numbers aren't standing out to me. 14. Yeah, in verse 14, the scriptures tell us that Shelah had grown up by this time and had not been given her as his wife yet. And so she's legitimately concerned. She needs children. To be viable in this culture, in this society, she has got to have children. She's got to have children to take care of her. She's worried at this time that Judah's not going to marry her. And she has no choice in the matter. She can't just go out and find a husband. She is in effect under Judah's authority. So she must wait for Judah to provide her a husband. And he's obviously neglected to do this. We're not told why. We don't even know how much time has passed. We just know that it's ample enough that she's lost her patience and is willing to do something drastic. And so he goes up one day to this sheep shearer, right, to get the wool cut off of the sheep. And she's told about this, and so she goes and dresses as a prostitute and waits by the side of the road, if you will, and basically seduces him into accepting her as a prostitute. Now, there's a very deep rabbit hole we can go into on the whole signet ring and staff and cord. We're not going to do this. Understand that they're symbols, and they were basically, by taking these three things, no one could deny that he had given them to her, and so he must owe her something. And there are things he cannot live without, so that she knows he will give her what he agreed upon, because he has to get this stuff back. The signet is what gives him authority on paperwork, right? It's also what he would give somebody if they were to act as a messenger to him. He would give them a signet so that they could show it, and then no one would question where they came from. In verse 20 it says, "When Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adulamite to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. And he asked the men of the place, 'Where's the cult prostitute who is at Enaim at the roadside?' And they said, 'No cult prostitute has been here.' So he returned to Judah and said, 'I have not found her.' Also the men of the place said, 'No cult prostitute has been here.' And Judah replied, 'Let her keep the things as her own, or we shall be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat, and you did not find her.' About 3 months later, Judah was told, 'Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by her immorality.' And Judah said, 'Bring her out and let her be burned.' As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, 'By the man to whom this belongs, I am pregnant.' She said, 'Please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff.' Then Judah identified them, and she said, 'She is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not know her again.'" Boy, Judah really missed the mark on this one, didn't he? He thinks she's more righteous because he failed to give her a husband. And she's more righteous because you were willing to burn her for the exact same crime that you were a part of. He's willing to burn this woman for being a prostitute, or more precise, for sleeping with somebody out of wedlock, and he was there, taking on what he believed a cult prostitute. A cult, by the way, that did not belong to the God that he proclaimed to follow. And yet there's no repentance here. We don't even really see that there's an understanding that there was something inherently wrong in this. But this man who would do this crime, who would sleep with a woman out of wedlock, would burn her for doing the same. Now, there are times I really struggle with figuring out what side of issues that I stand on, what side of the fence I'm on in this whole stupid political societal garbage that seems to be prevalent on everyone's mind. And I hear stories about people who are upset about women being oppressed, and we hear stories about men claiming that they're oppressed in similar ways, and so everyone's a victim in all of this. And the fact is, at the end of the day, we're all just hypocrites wanting somebody to be punished for the things that we've done. You know, I think it's pretty awesome in light of Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus gave us, because we're willing to look at somebody who takes somebody's life and say that their life is null and void and that they deserve to lose their life. And yet Jesus says if you've ever looked at somebody with hatred, you're just as guilty as they are. So I invite you to take a knife and take your life, because that's what you've decided that crime warrants. Or we look at two people who have failed to uphold the vows of chastity and have slept with each other before marriage. And we're willing to pass judgment on these people. And yet Jesus says, if you've looked at a woman in lust, you're just as guilty as they are. It's easy to be a hypocrite. It's easy to look at the crimes of another and make excuses for why they're so much worse than yours. And it's really cool. We've been talking in our men's group on Monday, we've been talking about morality, and I discussed how we always seem to come up with excuses to why us failing to follow the law of morality is somehow different than other people. And I find this to be unerringly true. We as people are really good at doing stupid, horrible things, and then like, well, you know, there's extenuating circumstances, and I did it because of this, and I didn't have a choice, and all of these things, and then we look at somebody else who does the exact same thing, and we're like, well, that was wrong. Christians who proclaim that truth is not subjective, that it is in fact objective, and so it doesn't matter how you feel or what's going on around the truth. The truth is the truth is the truth. Right is right and wrong is wrong. And yet we still somehow come up with excuses for why when we do the wrong thing, it's not the wrong thing. I think that on my final days, God will agree with me when I say, before you look to get somebody else's house in order, perhaps you should make sure your own is in order already. Judah here has completely missed the mark of righteousness. He has failed God, he has failed his commitments, and he has failed his family. Let's read through the chapter, verse 27. It says, when the time of her labor came, there were twins in her womb, and when she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took it and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, this one came out first. But as he drew back his hand, behold, his brother came out. And she said, what a breach you've made for yourself. Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterward his brother came out with the scarlet thread on his name and on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. This phrase, what a breach you've made for yourself. She's acknowledging that it's basically a phrase that suggests that this kid used his brother to breach so that he could get out first. Now, when I was reading through this and study, I kept coming up with an image of, when I first started hanging out with Andrew, we went bowling in Jonesboro, and there's this stupid punching machine, right? And for some reason, in my hyped up state, I thought that the genius idea was for me to pick up Andrew and use him as a battering ram to this punching machine. And I kept thinking about that when I'm reading that this is what this woman is describing, that this baby took his brother, breached the uterus, and threw him back so that he could leave. Now this story is, for me, was about the most humorous thing about the study, but it will come more important in later chapters, and I'll refer back to it when we get to that point. But I really do want to today focus on this issue of Judah and just how ridiculous this guy is. Alright? So I mentioned to you that he failed God, he failed his commandments, and he failed his family. He failed God because he went and took in a cult prostitute. There is several things wrong with that. Alright? I don't want you to get into the habit of thinking of a cult prostitute as the same thing as some prostitute on the street. There's more to this than that. Because a cult prostitute is worship to a pagan god. Sleeping with a cult prostitute is an act of worship to a pagan god. That's what a cult prostitute is. This is a culture that has a god, if you will. And I say this in general sense because this culture that we're looking at, the Canaanites, they're not the only ones to do this. In fact, the Greeks were probably the most prevalently known for this. But any culture who has a god of sexual appetite, if you will, has cult prostitutes. The Romans had the cult of Venus, the Greeks had the cult of Aphrodite, the Norse had the cult of Freya, the Canaanites, I'm not really sure what their god was, but it's the same situation that we're given, right? They have this deity who is literally the god or goddess of sex. And the way they worship this deity is to have sex. Specifically, they would have prostitutes who worked for the temple. You know, in our modern understanding, you would say they are on the same level that we would put a minister. And that's how they viewed these people. They were ministers. They were administering worship. So this was much worse than him just finding a woman on the street and offering her money. He worshipped a pagan god. I say that he failed his commitment because God had made it abundantly clear throughout their family's history insofar that what he did not want was for them to take wives from the Canaanites. Not only did he take a wife from the Canaanites, he went and found a wife from the Canaanites for his son as well. Lastly, he failed his family. You know, I do believe that at a certain point, the parents stopped being responsible for the decision of the
bond reduction, no getting out of jail free, no pass and go. Just wiped him out.
Then I have to believe that at some point that this is more than just him failing.
I have to believe that Judah comes in here somewhere. At some point, Judah has failed to father in a good and proper way.
I don't believe anyone turns out that evil
Without being guided to it.
He then continues to fail his family. We see no disciplinary action taken on Onan
After his failure to uphold his responsibilities. And while he tries to redeem this by taking Tamar into his own household and taking care of her until her older son can take her as a wife, he then fails again because he fails to uphold his promise to Tamar and give her a husband.
Understand this, Tamar is family. So that he then fails her
When he tries to burn her at the stake for doing the very thing that he is guilty of.
I've hit on it before, but I wanna make sure that it's the last little thought in your mind before we leave. This hypocrisy that we've looked at today, I think is honestly one of the biggest issues among Christians. Now understand, to a certain extent, we're all hypocrites. We have to be.
Right? Because on one hand, we have to tell people the way that they should be living, right? The way that God wants them to live, while understanding that we're never going to live that way. So on a certain level, we're all hypocrites. But the key here is to understand that you are failing.
The problem with the haughty mentality is when you get the idea that the other person is always at fault and what they're doing is wrong, and somehow you doing the same thing is not wrong. I don't think that when Jesus accused the Pharisees of being hypocrites, I don't think his problem was that they had somehow failed God. The Bible makes it abundantly clear that that was always going to happen.
Instead, the problem is that they were convincing themselves that they weren't wrong while doing the very thing that they accused other people of doing.
And do we do that today? Do we not have that issue amongst ourselves? You know, I've always
Had a problem with what I see as hypocrites. Long before I was a Christian, I hated it. Because how can somebody be so bad at self-evaluation that they can call somebody a liar while telling lies and then complaining that the other person is lying and coming up with an idea that they're okay to lie? Or how can somebody be cruel to somebody, be mean and demeaning to somebody, and then complain because that same person isn't kind to them?
It hasn't been but the last
2 or 3 years that I've come to quickly realize that I'm really just as bad at this as everyone else. I spent so much of my life calling people blind for these practices, only to come to the realization that I have somehow allowed myself to fall into the same trap of not realizing when I'm doing the very things that I tell other people that they ought not do.
I don't want you to get out of the habit of calling sin sin when you see it. I just want you to understand that you're doing it too.
And the reason that this is so important is this.
When we realize that we are just as guilty as everyone else, it is at that moment that God's sacrifice, that Jesus'
on its true and proper meaning.
You see, when we minimize our own unrighteousness, we can't help but to minimize
The blood of Christ.
when we realize that we deserve to be struck down where we stand.
When we realize that we deserve the treatment that received, that is when the sacrifice of Jesus takes on a beauty of sorts.
That's when the love of God
Truly comes to a deeper understanding within us.
we set aside.
A time whenever we gather together. And every once in a while I try to make it a habit of encouraging people to look at this a little bit differently than sometimes they do. Because I think
When the preacher starts wrapping up the sermon and starts giving the invitation, you have several different people. You always got the person that's
already opened up their songbook, they've already closed their Bible, they haven't heard a word you said for the last 3 minutes because they know it's about over. And then it's those people you have to question whether they're listening at all. And you've got the people that listen to the invitation because maybe, just maybe, this preacher who gives the same invitation every single week will give something a little bit different.
And you have the people who don't even realize what the invitation is.
I will say this, as a church, we have failed to help people understand what this moment is.
Your invitation to the cross
Does not start and stop at the end of my sermon.
Your invitation to the cross is always there. It doesn't matter what day of the week, it doesn't matter what hour of the day.
Doesn't matter how old or young you may be.
God desires a relationship with you.
He desires for that chasm between you to be filled and fulfilled and bridged across. And I don't want you guys to fall into the trap of believing that this invitation is less than that. It's also not just for the hopes that we have some guest here that is waiting on baptism. We do invite them back. But this moment here that we formally invite people, this is for the purpose of facilitation, if you will.
See, God always invites you to the cross.
Right now, we invite you to make it known that you wish to come to the cross so that we can help you. So this morning, as we've done every Sunday morning, if you're in need of prayers this morning, if you're in need of assistance of any kind, or if you're ready for the waters of baptism, to take on the blood of Christ, to be buried and resurrected within his burial and resurrection, to be raised up a new creation with a new purpose and a new hope. Whatever those needs are that you